In 2021, the Air Force sent 17 bombers to the boneyard, their airframes worn out. Not one of them was a B-52. They were B-1B Lancers built in the 1980s, 30 years younger than the jets that stayed on the ramp. Which tells you that the word old is doing almost no work here. Two aircraft of the same age can be in completely different condition, and what separates them is how much of each one can still be taken off and replaced. The Air Force is now spending roughly $21 billion across 13 separate upgrade programs on the older of those two aircraft. It is getting new engines, a new radar, and a new designation, B-52J, to fly it into the 2050s. Nobody spends $21 billion on nostalgia. They are spending it because this airframe keeps accepting the future and has kept accepting it since 1952. So we are going to answer one question properly. What is actually inside this aircraft that lets that keep happening? 3 parts. What can still be replaced on it, what it can still be handed to carry, and whether anyone can still afford to pay for either. Explaining machines at that level is what Classified Decoded does. Subscribe. The sky is not empty. It is a battlefield with rules written in physics. The story starts with a promise. In 1945, the Air Materiel Command asked for an aircraft that could strike anywhere on Earth without depending on foreign bases. Because forward bases are the first thing you lose in a total war. The requirement was not really a bomber. It was a promise that no Allies' runway had to survive for American air power to reach the target. For 6 years, Boeing chased it down a dead end with propellers. Then, over a single weekend in 1948, a handful of engineers threw them out and drew a swept-wing jet with 8 engines in 4 pods. That shape is still flying, and it flew in numbers. 742 built between 1952 and 1962, variants A through H. Only the last still flies, the B-52H. Today, around 76 remain on the books, 58 active and 18 in reserve, and the youngest is past 60. Here is how far the airframe has stretched. For 45 years, NASA flew a single B-52 as a launch aircraft. It dropped the X-15 106 times and, on its last mission in 2004, released a scramjet that reached Mach 9.6. Nothing in that original requirement mentioned launching spacecraft. The wing took it anyway. And when that aircraft retired, it was the oldest B-52 still flying, and the one with the fewest hours on it of any B-52 in service. The same lesson the boneyard taught us a minute ago, from the other direction. So the question is not about age, it is about design. What is inside a machine drawn in 1948 that lets it keep taking on work nobody designed it for, when almost nothing else built since can manage the same trick? Start with the structure.
To get a bomber that accepts almost anything, you build one that chases no extreme. The B-52 was never the fastest or the stealthiest in the sky, and it was never meant to be. Push no trait to its limit, and you leave room everywhere. It just refuses to be finished. Start at the wing, 185 feet, long, thin, and deliberately not stiff. It is not fighting the air, it is absorbing it. Every gust that would land as a shock load on a rigid spar becomes a bend and a release instead. And a bend that was designed for is a bend that does not crack. 2 more choices, neither made with the future in mind. The bomb bay was left unpressurized to save weight, which spares it the swelling and shrinking that ages an airliner faster than anything else. And with no computers to tell them exactly how strong to build it, the engineers guessed high, leaving extra strength in the metal. Both were compromises for weight and cost, made by a team that could not have named a single threat this aircraft would face after 1970. What they produced was margin. Structure nobody needed yet. Volume nobody had filled yet. Tolerance nobody had spent yet. That headroom is the raw material of every upgrade that came after, and an aircraft that ships without it can never be improved, only replaced. The margin was inherited. The 70 years were earned. The metal did not get a free ride. When Soviet missiles pushed the B-52 down to low-level penetration, the denser air raised the load on the wing by as much as 60%. The original design had never been sized for that, and it began to crack. The fix was metallurgy. The lower wing skin was swapped from a hard, brittle alloy to a softer, tougher one. They did not make the wings stronger. They made it slightly worse at resisting the first crack and far better at refusing to pass it along. The trade an engineer makes when the problem is not one hard hit, but 10,000 small ones. The life-limiting part, the upper wing surface, is good for 32 to 37,000 flight hours, and the fleet spends them at under 400 a year, which is why it still takes new hardware. The re-engining swaps 8 old engines for 8 Rolls-Royce F-130S, which raises an obvious question. Why 8, not 4 larger ones? The answer is aerodynamic. Lose one of 4 big engines and the asymmetric thrust twists the aircraft with twice the force of losing one of 8, more than the original tail fin can hold. So the swap is 8 for 8. The F-130 makes the same 17,000 pounds of thrust as the engine it replaces. It adds no power, only fuel efficiency, and one stated benefit is fewer tankers needed for the same mission. Hold on to that. It comes back when we talk about money. The rebuild reaches the cockpit too. Glass displays for the analog gauges, the crew cut from 5 to 4. None of it has been clean though. The work has cost more than planned and arrived late. The engine program alone is up more than a third since 2018, and the radar is 3.5 years behind, not operational until the end of the decade. The Air Force is paying anyway, because every alternative costs more, so the machine can be taken apart and rebuilt. On its own, that buys nothing. An airframe you can upgrade forever is worthless if there is nothing new worth hanging on it. So look at what it carries. To hang anything you like under a wing, you have to accept being seen. Radar cross-section is the rent the B-52 pays for a weapons interface with no ceiling. And it pays gladly, because the payload is enormous. 70,000 pounds of weapons on top of 300,000 pounds of fuel. The B-1B lifts a little more, and nothing else in the inventory comes close to either. But weight was never the interesting half of this. What decides an arsenal is how many different things the aircraft is cleared to carry, and how fast that list can grow. Look at the catalog. Same airframe, same hardpoints, 4 completely different kinds of war. Satellite-guided JDAMs, from 500-pounders up to 2,000-pound bunker weapons. Stealthy Yassam cruise missiles that strike from beyond the edge of an air defense. Quick-strike sea mines, a Navy job flown by a bomber, sewn from outside the threat ring. Decoys that carry no warhead at all, there only to make an enemy radar light up and give itself away. 4 kinds of war, 1 set of hardpoints, and no redesign between them. Getting there shows how the aircraft grows. For most of its life, the bomb bay could only hold dumb bombs. Every smart weapon had to hang outside, costing drag and range. A new rotary launcher with a digital MIL STD 1760 interface put 8 smart weapons inside the bay, a 66% jump in guided weapon capacity, bringing the total Yassam load to 20, 8 internal and 12 on the wings. But the ceiling on its firepower was not physical at all. It was the electrical bus. 20 missiles could be bolted on, and the aeroplane could only wake a handful at a time. Any more risked tripping the breakers in flight. Only after a power upgrade could the crew arm, target, and launch all 20 at 20 separate aim points in one pass. And this is the part that outlasts every specific weapon. A stealth aircraft has to swallow its ordnance. Anything that will not fit inside the bomb bay does not exist for it, and the size of that bay was frozen the day the drawing was signed. The B-52 has no bomb bay ceiling. It has a wing. In May of 2026, the Air Force went looking for a new wing pylon rated at 20,000 pounds a side, up from around 5,000 today, built for the heaviest hypersonic weapons. When the weapon outgrows the aircraft, a sealed design has to be redrawn. This one only changes the hook, the whole difference between a closed system and an open one, and the reason a machine sketched in 1948 is being fitted, right now, to carry a weapon its designers did not live to see. An aircraft that can be rebuilt and can carry anything is still only a proposal. Somebody has to keep signing for it, decade after decade, against every newer machine competing for the same money. So price it. To stay this cheap, the B-52 accepts one limit. It can no longer fly into airspace the enemy still defends. That trade is what pays for the other two. Start with the raw number. An hour in a B-52 costs about $70,000. An hour in a B-2 costs $169,000, about 2.5 times as much. Why the B-2 costs that much is its own story, and we have told it. The B-52 is cheap for a plain reason. Almost nothing on it has to be perfect for the next flight to happen. It never flew supersonic, so it never had to carry what supersonic costs. The swing wing pivots, the heat-hardened structure, the shape built to survive breaking the sound barrier, all of it dead weight on every flight, including the slow ones. Fixed wing, nothing delicate to protect, systems a crew can fix outdoors on a bare flight line. And the sticker price understates the saving, because of range. The B-52 flies about 7,600 nautical miles without refueling. Every hour it does not need a tanker is a tanker sortie that never flies. Another aircraft, another crew, another bill that disappears. A short-legged bomber costs its own hour plus the fleet of tankers trailing behind it, and in a war across the Pacific, tankers are the scarcest thing there is. That same range is what lets it loiter, hanging over the battlefield for hours, worth more to a ground commander who does not yet know what he will need than any amount of speed. Now the payoff, and it is just arithmetic. All three American bomber fleets are ready to fly only about half the time. So what decides how many bombers are actually flyable on a given Tuesday is not readiness. It is how many you own. Half of the B-2's 19 airframes is 9. Half of the B-52's 76 is 38. And once a production line closes, that larger number can never be rebuilt. Being cheap is what let the Air Force own enough B-52s that half of them is still a force. And 19 was never a verdict on the B-2. That small number is what the end of the Cold War did to a production line, not what engineering did to an aircraft. The B-1B is the same lesson in reverse. It is supersonic, and it costs at least as much an hour as the B-52. Then it was sent to fly slow. 2 decades of patrol over Iraq and Afghanistan, missions that never once asked it to go fast. The Lancer did not fail. It was spent on the wrong mission, and a variable geometry wing keeps a harsher account than a fixed one, like paying for a sports car and only ever driving it to the shops. Every hour of slow patrol was billed against a structure built to go fast, and the bill arrived 30 years later, as those 17 airframes in the boneyard. None of this makes the B-52 free. $21 billion of upgrades is not a bargain. Half a fleet being flyable is not a triumph, and the strain now reaches past the aircraft. The new standoff cruise missile slipped 4 months, partly because too few B-52s were available to test it. The B-52 is affordable. It is not healthy. But affordable and tired is still the best offer on the ramp, which is the uncomfortable thing this whole comparison says about the other two. Put those 3 answers next to each other, and a question surfaces that none of them asks alone. If the missile is the thing that penetrates, what exactly is the bomber for? The Air Force has rewritten the word. A bomber is no longer the machine that reaches the target. It is a magazine and a launch position, and the missile is what goes in. In that instant, every trait this aircraft lacks turned optional, and every trait it has turned decisive. It cannot survive over a defended target, and it no longer has to. That is the largest upgrade in its history, larger than any engine or radar, and it never touched the airframe at all. Its purpose changed. The airframe never had to. Now go back to the structure we admired in the first act, and ask what is actually left of 1962. The engines, the radar, the instruments, the weapons interface, the wing skins, the pylons, the crew, even the mission. Every one has already been rebuilt at least once. What remains original is the geometry of the wing and the spar beneath it. The B-52 was never preserved. It has been remanufactured, continuously, inside its own outline. And that was possible for one reason. It shipped with far more margin than its first mission required. An aircraft optimized to the last pound cannot do this. There is nothing left in it to spend. And notice what had to be true, all at once, for any of it to happen. The airframe had to have something left to replace. There had to be something new worth carrying. And it had to stay cheap enough that somebody kept signing the check. Take away any one of those three, and this aircraft was scrapped decades ago. Most machines lose that third leg first. Not worn out, just no longer worth the money to keep improving. The B-1B lost the first leg instead, the structure itself, which no check can buy back. That is what the Air Force actually trusts. Not an old aeroplane, but a machine that can be handed a problem its designers never imagined and come back carrying the answer. There is a detail in the B-21 Raider program that only makes sense once you have watched this story. The Raider is built around an open systems architecture, hardware and software deliberately designed to be opened, swapped, and rewritten by engineers who have not been hired yet. Those are the B-52's 70 years, written into a requirement document before the first aircraft was delivered. The lesson was learned from the bomber that taught it the slow way. So when you next hear that a weapon system is old, ask a better question than the one everyone asks. Do not ask how many years it has flown. Ask how much margin it shipped with, and whether anyone is still paying to convert it into something new. An aircraft with headroom and a sponsor is young, whatever the calendar says. One bomber can go anywhere. The other can stay everywhere, and keep becoming something else while it stays. If the budget only stretches to 100 of one of them, which one do you want?